Yeah, that's right.
All right, everybody. Thank you all for coming today to the first of this year's open access events. Today we're going to talk about some of the, the higher level issues and how open access, why it matters to the university. So what I will do is I'll introduce our panelists, and then what we'll do is we'll each one kind of talk a little bit about maybe some of their experiences with open access, just a kind of a brief, maybe a couple minute intro, and then we'll kind of move into some specific topics that pertain to the university and how open access kind of plays into some of those things, how it can make a difference. So we'll start with Dr. Chris Winstead, the Interim Dean of the College of Science and Technology, Dr. Gordon Cannon, the Vice President for Research, Dr. John I, the Dean of University Libraries, and Dr. Amy Miller, I'm going to get your title wrong, but it's the Associate Provost.
Vice Provost.
Vice Provost.
For Academic Affairs.
Thank you. What she said. So, I guess, Dr. Winstead, you want to get us kicked off?
Sure, yeah. Just glad to be here today. Can't claim to be a world expert on open access by any means. But through our department, the Department of Physics, we first got into really discussing as a department open access as it related to textbooks a couple of years ago. I don't know how deep we want to get into that right now, but that was kind of our entree into the subject because, introductory physics really doesn't change that quickly. But we were in a cycle of forcing students to buy a new edition of a textbook every 2 to 3 years. And so the expense of that was really what kind of drove us toward the open access textbook market. And so I'll say more on that for a little later, but for my 2-minute intro, but then just wanted to bring this as evidence that in physics, open access is a hot topic right now. This is the May edition of Physics Today. Don't know if you got your edition yet. It's circulation is a little limited, but no, for physicists, all physicists who are members of the American Physical Society, practically all physicists in the world are members of the American Physical Society, and we all get Physics Today. And so, for the physics community, open access is really a very hot topic. It's something that physics, I'll go ahead and say we led the way on many years ago, back in the early 90s with the start of what's now a very extensive, database might not be the right word, but I'll call it that, collection of preprint articles. You may be familiar with archive.org, it's ARXIV. That was started by physicists in the early 90s, really as email technology became available. And so there were some physicists in the beginning who started a group, basically an email tree of emailing preprints to one another. And that eventually, as technology evolved, grew into what we know as archive today. And so I can keep talking about that. I think my 2 minutes might be better.
Well, my experience with open access primarily comes from being, working biochemist before I got the gig I have now. And about, I would say, 15 years ago, there was this tremendous amount of discussion among the community that, we're paying a lot of people a lot of money to publish work that we are producing or the government's paying for, and this is sort of counter to everything that makes sense. And if you were at universities, as every year went by, it seemed as if the ability to pay for access to the journals in a timely fashion, was being reduced. So a number of relatively big-name molecular biologists and biochemists decided to start the Public Library of Science. And the idea is that you'll have just as good peer review. Of course, it also was linked with the availability of the internet and being able to do things online. Just as good quality of peer review. It should come out in a more timely fashion, and it would be open access to anybody who wanted to read it. And maybe as we get a little bit further along into the details of this, the downside of it is that authors had to pay on the front end. And as long as the journal was recognized by everybody as doing a very good job, and in fact doing a good job, there was no problem. But very rapidly it seemed a lot of companies popped up, or a lot of journals popped up for pay for access, and perhaps they were not doing the peer review quite so diligently as they should. And I think among some folks, the reputation of open access dropped to the point that perhaps tenure and promotion committees at universities did not necessarily want to accept those as real measures of achievement as much as they did the classical subscription journals. And I think that argument's still running about half and half. I know personally, I've published probably 15 times in the last 10 years in online journals that I was very pleased with the result. So that's my experience, and I'll be happy to comment more.
Well, I think my experience as far as open access and the philosophy that it brings to academia and scholarly communications, from a dollars and cents standpoint, of course, I think a lot of people realize that for the user, open access is a good deal because it's, it shifts the cost from the user to the producer, generally speaking. And what I like about that from a library standpoint, from a financial standpoint, is not only that it gives users better access generally speaking, better access and access to more choices, but also from a administrative standpoint, from a library, it does give us, it's not as much leverage as we'd like to have, but it does give us more leverage to work with vendors. If that's one of the struggles that we have, is that when you negotiate with an Elsevier or a big publisher that's established, we can't just walk away very easily because it's really, they have the corner of the market. But at least open access is putting a little bit of pressure on that monopoly that they seem to have.
I guess I'm the new one on the block when it comes to thinking about open educational resources, but from my perspective, I tend to look at it more from the user side in terms of student success, as well as looking at it pedagogically from the faculty side. So thinking about it in the context of teaching and learning, I think there's a lot of benefits for both students and faculty to using more open educational resources. And I think anybody who's talked to an undergraduate student about classes and expenses, you'll hear them talk about the cost of textbooks. So that's what first kind of sparked my interest in thinking about the ways in which students could have more affordable access, but also easier and earlier access to materials, because I saw so many students struggling and postponing purchasing required materials because they couldn't afford them. And so I've worked with some of the departments on campus to try to implement open educational resources so that students could get access to what they needed to do well in class sooner. I'm also interested in it on the pedagogical side, from access to the most recent research to share with your students, and also for pedagogical creativity. So happy to comment on that if anybody's interested.
Well, since we're all kind of already on the subject of open textbooks, we want to kind of piggyback on that, tell a little bit more about the things that physics is doing in that regard.
Sure, yeah, well, this was something that came up with us, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago now at least. And originally, I think it was part of the faculty frustration with textbook cost. I mean, that was the big driver, because we felt like we really didn't need to be going from the 12th to the 13th edition of an introductory physics textbook. Nothing had changed in physics that we were going to cover in Physics 111 and 112. We don't do gravity wave theory in Physics 111 and 112. And so, I mean, honestly, you could take a textbook from the 1960s. I think probably calculus, introductory chemistry. All of these are subjects that have not changed that much. And computer science, you don't want to textbook from the 60s, I understand that.
Sociology either.
Although there are a lot of interesting sociological experiments in the 60s, I
Yes,
hear.
there were.
So there was a lot of frustration from the faculty on asking, but because, of course, the game then is, if you come out with a new edition, and then the bookstore can only buy the new books, and then that means the used book market, the students can't go onto the used book market and use a used book. They have to go buy a new book. And so it really was a game I always felt like the publishers were playing, which I know they have to make money. I don't discount that. But it was silly, to ask a student to pay $300 for if we could just get them all the same book from 1968, we'd be fine. So then we realized there was a program called OpenStax at Rice University. Some of you may be familiar with that. And Rice now has a number of textbooks. They have introductory physics, both algebra, trig, and calculus based. They have chemistry, they have calculus, they have astronomy. They have, in fact, one of our faculty members, Dr. Chris Sorolla, was involved in the open access textbook as part of the review process and editing process for the Rice OpenStax astronomy textbook. Again, the idea being that there's no reason that we should be charging students $300 for information that's really been around a long time. Not only that, most of these are available online. You can order a hard copy if you want, and if you do order a hard copy, it's about $40, So we just had a very positive experience in the physics department. You can still get, there are third-party vendors who will provide, if you're interested in online homework services, they service the open educational resources textbooks. So you can still, people were worried, well, if I don't bundle online homework with the textbook, which is a lot of times the way it's done, I won't be able to use online homework, but that's not true. WebAssign, for example, works with OpenStax to provide online homework access. So a lot of the resources that you expect, of course they're not as developed perhaps as going to a publisher, but I think OpenStax, in the way that Dr. I was referring to, probably open access journals putting some pressure on traditional publishers like Elsevier or I guess Springer, people like that. I think that's what open educational resources, projects like OpenStax and Rice are putting that pressure on the traditional textbook companies as well. And I think that's a very good thing for our students because these are quality books that have been written by faculty who volunteered their time. And honestly, I taught for the first time out of one last year. Couldn't tell the difference, between that and a book that would have been $300. So I taught a long time on that, I'm sorry. I'm really passionate about that particular part.
Me too.
Because of the expense to the students. It's crazy to be paying $300 for
Speaking of talking a long time about something, this is
yeah.
something that I could easily go on a long time about myself, and I'm going to try to keep my moderator hat on and not delve too far into, because we actually have a joint initiative with the Provost office right now called the Open Textbook Initiative that encourages faculty to implement open textbooks in their courses. So replacing the traditional textbook with an open textbook, either an existing one like something on OpenStax, or by sort of compiling their own from multiple sources, or from creating their own. It's a three-tiered application structure. So you can adopt, which is that first tier, just taking an existing textbook, open textbook, modify, kind of building your own from a combination of other open resources and even library resources for that matter. Or then the third one, which is create, which is to build your own open textbook from the ground up. For the sake of not hijacking the whole panel, I won't go into a ton of the specifics now, but that application process is open right now. The application is on the Provost website. If you go there and click on the awards and endowments link, you'll see it listed there. And if you have questions on the specifics, I'm happy to field those afterward. One example I'll give you though really quickly. One of the projects we funded this past cycle, this past year, is an open textbook for the Math 101 course. That course is being reworked now. The Math 099 and the 101 is being reworked into a co-requisite model, 101 and a 101 lab that kind of covers the part that 99 was covering before. And so they're currently developing that book. They're going to pilot it in the spring, then roll it out to everybody next fall. And the estimated savings they're looking at, because that's a course that all of our students are coming through, they're looking at just in a single year saving over $300,000 in costs for students and textbooks. So if you're looking at something that makes a positive impact on our students, that's a huge thing. I mean, if students are scraping to come up with the money to stay enrolled in the university, and you can save them a few $100 on textbook costs, that could be the difference between someone sticking out and saying, okay, I can keep going with this, or I just can't afford it. I mean, it's a really practical way to make a difference for our students.
Somebody, talk about somebody who can go on for a long time about this, it's me, and I'm not a moderator, so prepare yourself. But I do think that math example is a perfect example, because we are moving to this co-requisite model, because the math sequencing course is our most significant obstacle to student persistence. And one of the biggest problems we discovered through research last year, where we interviewed and surveyed students who were taking the course, the textbook came up as a huge obstacle, because if you are taking math and you are already kind of fearful of math and you don't have a book for the first 3 weeks or 4 weeks, by the time you get one, you're already so behind that it makes it even more unlikely for you to actually be successful in the course. So for me, it is about cost, but it's also about accessibility and ease of access for students, because what many students would do is they would wait for their financial aid so they could get the book, but there's also kind of the clunkiness of a physical book, and they want to do the quizzes and things on their phone. They don't want to have a physical textbook to carry around. So it happens at multiple layers that particular example is a benefit to the students. It saves them money, but it also gives them early access and easy access. So it's all three things. I think that it's kind of the magic combination. And then from the pedagogical side, I love that they're building a textbook, because I think they can use their own creativity to think about how can you best convey college algebra to an 18-year-old in 2017? How can you build out a course in Canvas so that the students can log in and get access to the materials immediately for free? They've been teaching algebra a while. I think they know how to communicate it effectively to young folks. So I'm very excited about that, and I think it'll make a difference for the students.
And it really makes a difference for the faculty too. I mean, going again back to that same example, one of the things they pointed out that really led them toward doing this was that they found that every textbook they looked at, none of them covered the material in the way they found was the most effective way to teach the material.
The sequencing was
exactly
wrong,
right.
So they wanted to adjust that.
And so by creating their own, they're able to make sure that the sequence follows the method they found is most effective. They're able to tailor that course, tailor that book to match what they have found is most effective. So they're not sort of bound by the restraints of a traditional textbook where, okay, maybe what we think would taught best is in part of chapter 1, part of chapter 3. No, we can put it in the sequence that we find works best. So there's benefits, the student benefits, but the faculty benefits as well.
You know, one thing that you might hear some argument though from the publishers. When I was teaching on a regular basis, I was teaching senior and graduate level biochemistry, and that does change fairly fast.
Right, sure.
But still, if you look at the different editions over a 2-year period, there was not that much, because the technology for delivering this has changed. The book itself was not changing that much. It was the online access that you got with a tag that came with the book.
Right.
And so, you know, to go from a $450 book to a $520 book in 2 years, and the only thing that really changed was your access online, I think caused a lot of people to rebel and just said, we're just not going to use these books at all. And hopefully there's going to be some pressure on even those high-end texts to do that.
Well, I know from a person with a bad back perspective, I certainly liked carrying my iPad rather than this intro physics book, lugging it home every day, and
Also, if
that's
you
kind of a
forget
side benefit for just certain people.
you lose your book, which we have students do, or you
Or they're stolen.
or get it
Happened a
stolen.
couple times.
You know, wherever, if it's an online book through Canvas, wherever you are and there's a computer, you have your book. So you go home to visit family, you forget your book, you have a test, and you can still do your homework, you can still keep up. So I think there are a lot of different benefits.
I think even from a recruiting and promotional standpoint, open access is, I think is growing substantially across the country. Other institutions are doing things like you're talking about. And I think too, whether you want to think about it offensively or defensively, other institutions are growing their portfolio of open access courses, and I think if we don't stay aggressive and continue to grow in that area, we may be an institution that maybe gets turned down by some students who realize that the department that they go into, they're going to save a lot of money because of departments like yours that are, farther along than other institutions. When I was at SUU, we taught a required class, information literacy, just a 1-credit class. But one of the things that we did to promote the class, to really try to make an appeal to students, even though they had to take it, we wanted them to come into it with an open mind, and also because it was required, and also to new recruits that would come through and tour the library. It was a talking point that we had, that we provide this 1-credit class, but there's no textbook. But we provide the textbook, we update it every semester, and there's no burden on you to buy this textbook, but it's going to help you in the rest of your courses throughout and I think that's a selling point.
Yeah. I want to segue off of something you said there, and then after that I want to throw open to the audience. I'll let them bring some questions as well. But you mentioned about if we don't keep up with some of these things, that it may affect us in terms of our ability to attract students. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about that from the standpoint of research dollars and attracting grants, where you're looking at things like the requirements for federally funded research and making data available, making publications available, those sorts of things, and how some of those things can have an impact on the way that we do research and how we submit grant proposals, that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, it's essential. If you're writing a grant proposal, typically, your deadline's 3 weeks away, right? If you're really on top of things. Most people, it's like the next day. And it never fails. Well, maybe you're finishing things up, and it never fails that you will, be rereading that narrative, and you say, well, I need to put something in from so-and-so, and I know that they did this. You come to the library to look for it. We don't have it. You go online, and it was published 6 months ago, but it's embargoed for another year, so you're stuck. So that's a big impact. Not being able to get to the material when you really need it is a way of stifling, particularly not just grant proposals, but grant proposals are so timeline and deadline mandated that it makes a big impact there. But even when you're writing a paper, I mean, you have a thought, you'd like to be able to look something up then, not 2 weeks later or whenever you can get it back. So open access sort of fixes that. But having said that too, you better make sure that in your budget you put enough money, if you're going to play the open access game, that you can come up with about $1,200 a page when you get ready to publish. And some agencies are very happy to do that, as long as it's a journal that they've sort of put the seal of approval on, and some are not.
Yeah. Plus, there's another level on top of that too. If the data is actually required to be made available, then there's the question: okay, well, where's the cost for that storage coming from? That's
true.
A whole other layer.
I'll jump out on a limb with a sociological component.
Go for it.
When I am way out of my league when that starts happening. But no, I mean, I feel like over time also, I think this is just partly based on conversations I've had with people, and partly some of the information out of this article, for example, is that younger scientists, younger people are more used to instant access to information. That's what they've grown up with. It's what they've learned. And so Netflix or YouTube and that maybe there's something within those types of models where you have content on a platform that is supported in some other way through advertising or whatever, but that's going to drive over time much a stronger push toward open access journals because of like you say, the desire to have that information right now. I I can go to Amazon Prime and I can pull up a TV show just like that. Why can't I read an article in a journal that, from research that was supported by the National Science Foundation?
You can, but you might have to pay $45.
Exactly. And so, I think there are going to be some cultural changes that are going to drive some of this as well. For people who just expect that that's the way it should be.
Well, it is their normal, right? You have to, it's what we call like light switch technology. None of us think about it when we flip the light switch. It just is our reality. And you have to remember that our first and second year students were born after Google was invented. So that's their light switch level technology is instant access to answers to any question they can ask. The other side of that, however, is they're comfortable with technology, but their literacy around information is relatively low. And I think the two are connected. I know for me, and probably everybody else on the panel, I remember spending a lot of time in the stacks in graduate school and undergraduate, and I have in my mind what a print journal is. And so when I see an article online, when I'm looking through the databases and reading it in my mind, I know that's an article because I have in my mind this print journal. And I can tell the difference between that form of information and other things that are out there available through Google. And our students struggle a lot with those distinctions, I think, our traditional age students. So I think as we move into more open access, which I think is where we're going, information literacy for our traditional age students, our millennials and Generation Z folks now, that is going to be a really critical component to help them understand the meaning of the information that they're getting.
I think that's a technology skill too. I just got 2 emails today saying that I needed to respond to an urgent message from the administrator, from the IT administration. And
Click here.
yeah, click here, and it's. Yeah, I know. I mean, I've got dozens of them, and I should know better. But I'd have to admit that it was tempting. I mean, it's easy to
Clickbait.
It's easy to fall prey to that and not think about what you're doing.
It's hard for many students to distinguish between what I see as a legitimate sociological journal and what, Uncle Jim wrote on his blog. It's all on the internet. And that's how it looks to them. And so there's a big gap in awareness and knowledge there for our students. Many of them, not all of them, but many.
I do at this point want to throw over to the audience to see if any of you guys have some questions or if you want us to expand on any things we've discussed thus far. Or okay.
So we talked about the direct savings to students, and then some of the maybe indirect savings that we get in terms of like negotiating power or student retention financially. And I don't know if you know I don't know the answer to this, but it can't be that the university bookstore is selling the books at cost. Is it? I would assume the university is making some money out of that exchange, especially when, as a student, you sell your used book for $15 and see it on sale as a used book the next semester for $150. So I wonder, for the institution, what is open access? Who wins in that financially? So let's say we've all gone out open access for those books that we can go out open access for, and there's no more students buying new textbooks. And that's great for the student, and maybe we get some retention, and maybe Elsevier drops their price by $5,000 for a year. Have we shot ourselves in the wallet in that situation, or have we saved ourselves a bunch of money? Do we know? Do we
That's
have
really
any?
a question for the CFO, to be honest.
But I don't think we make that. The university does not make that much on textbook sales. Barnes and Nobles.
Right.
Two things I'm taking my moderator out for a second here, but 2 things I'll add on this because I do talk about this a lot is number one, if you look at sort of the raw figures of it all, the thing that's the bigger threat to the textbook centers on campus are the Amazons of the world. It's not your OER. I mean, a prime example of this, UMass Amherst a few years back, their contract with their bookstore ran out, and so they were talking to different vendors about possibly coming in and taking that on. And Amazon came in and they brought this data of all the surrounding areas where their students have been buying textbooks from Amazon and said, look, here's all this money that your students are paying to us to buy these textbooks, and you're seeing no return on any of those dollars. What if you make this deal with us where the students buy their books from us, you get a cut off of whatever those sales are, whether they're buying new, used, whatever. We'll ship them for free overnight on the campus. The student just goes there, picks them up. And so they signed on, they did that. That's the way they handle their textbooks now. They said they still have like a bookstore technically that's kind of has like the t-shirts and all that kind of merchandise, but they don't have like an actual textbook center on campus. It's all done through Amazon. The student goes online, makes their purchase, the university gets a cut out of it, and they're shipped directly to campus.
And that's, I guess my follow-up was, if it turned out we were losing out on financially, is it still worth it? Is open access still totally worth the participation?
I would say yes for the student benefit.
I
Just purely for a student?
Yeah, yeah.
And
I mean,
just
I think-
financially too, if you retain significantly more students who are paying tuition, just on the financial bottom line, it could be a gain. But there are a lot of
I mean,
questions out there.
it pushes and pulls on someone in a lot of different ways, so.
And I think, and I don't know much about the contract that the university has with Barnes & Noble, but Barnes & Noble is not going to sign a loser contract. So, they're getting enough back to make it worthwhile to read, and they do this across the country. So I know that the university benefits from the sales of books at Barnes & Noble, and that they would say, and they have said to me, that the margin that they make is very slim, and that the real markup, the real margin is at the publisher level. And I think if you read about academic publishing, whether it's books or journals, they do very well. I mean, it sounds like they're not just getting by on the skin of their teeth. They're in this tough economy, they're still doing very well. So I think, that's, again, going back to why I like open access, is that it somehow puts a disruption, or at least tries to put a disruption or some kind of innovation in this broken model where we pay researchers and professors to do research as part of their job, then we pay them the peer review, and then we hand over this product to them, and then we buy it back from them. I mean, that is I'm not aware of any other market where that occurs, like where it's broken like that. So there's got to be some other way to improve on that where we're at.
And then, I don't know, you mentioned the margins on the textbooks are not very large. I suspect the financial benefit to Barnes & Noble may be through other merchandise.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
the books are a very small part of
The
the
books are just kind of part of it. and they
Gets them
really
in the door.
It's kind of like a gas station. They don't really make their money on the gas. They
Like
Snicker bars.
$26 umbrellas.
Yeah.
Two things on that line. One, there was an article in the Chronicle a few years back talking about that very thing that said if you look at the raw profit margins, that the bookstores actually make greater profit margins selling chips to you than they do on selling the textbooks. And number two, the thing I always point out to people is when you walk in the bookstore, what do you walk in on? You walk in on all that other merchandise. The textbooks are all upstairs. That's not the thing you walk in and you see. So what are they trying to get your attention with? The stuff that's going to make them more money, right? I mean, that's just sort of basic business principle. So.
Well, one thing too, on the, like for example, with the OpenStax books, you can buy hard copies, and the bookstore had hard copies of the, and now you can do these things free online, but some students just like that physical book. And so they didn't buy as many as they would have normally bought, but they did buy, a number of the hard copy books from OpenStax to sell in the bookstore. So they worked with us very closely on that, and they in fact sold the book, but it was $40 instead of $250.
So you had a question, say again?
You see, I come from China, so the first time when I come to US, I found the US textbooks extremely expensive. The first semester's textbook cost is more than my 2 years living expense in China. So, yeah. So I don't understand. So at that one, I think all US must very rich. Then later I found only the textbook are expensive, when we go to the bookstore, the novels and they're very cheap. But this is compensated in China. Textbook in China is extremely cheap, but like nature product novels is much is more expensive than the textbook. Then when I heard the Provost have the textbook initiative, I think that is the key, the difference of in China and US. In China, we have a committee in the national level. They responsible for make the textbook, update the textbook, and every university and the students can use those. So the cost, the cost will be the cost for the publication, for the copies. So so here it seems that the provost are doing something for our university. I think if our university can make this work with other universities, like the mathematics, as we said. For mathematics, we use the same things back to back to 100 years. I saw some old fact they still use 30 years notes to teach.
I don't want to talk to them.
But yeah. So my point here is for the access. For the open access, I don't know whether it's really free charge for the students or that accessible is only for our university. Another concern is about the quality. Because in China we have they organize the committees, big committees for one textbook. They pick up the best professors from different university, and also they have different level of the same textbook. Some book for the community college, some just like calculus. They have calculus for community college, calculus for Tier 1 universities, Tier 2 universities. Yeah.
Very different.
Yeah. So I talked to Marlene, and she is writing the textbook for Math 101. Yeah. And it sounds good. Okay. I haven't said the final copies.
I wanted to kind of extrapolate on some points that you and John made. I order materials for the libraries, and we recently did the Golden Eagle Textbook Initiative grant that was applied for, and for this past fiscal year and going on into the next fiscal year to supply textbooks on reserve for students for entry-level classes. And John, I noticed that there isn't a lot of difference between the price at Barnes & Noble's and for a new copy on Amazon, because we were looking for the cheapest prices that we could get for these materials. But I did notice that international editions of books you could get for $3 with 1,000 or 2,000% markup for the American edition. But I did not order any of those because there's a small little amount of copyright that may not let us circulate those in the library, but a student can definitely legally order those secondhand or buy them brand new from China and have them shipped to America.
Yes, I saw some graduate students for the textbook, graduate level textbook from China, asking them shipped from China to here.
Just get a plane ticket and go.
And the material,
the price.
yeah, the material's
It's the same.
Exactly
the
the
same.
same.
They only say that this book only sell in China,
Yeah.
but you can use it in US. They only say.
I think the issue for a lot of students is that they don't have any money, so they're waiting to use their financial aid or to charge it to their account. And so that means that they have to use the bookstore. And so that kind of precludes some of those avenues. And again, it's not just the money, it's that delay in time that we all see if you work with students that causes real issues.
Also for the price difference, this semester I taught, I'm teaching the differential equation, use the Zio's book. There are some issue with the bookstore and the publisher. Later I found because the publisher gave me a price, say like the book and the access code for online homework is $75. Then later I found the marketing price is $125 by the bookstore. Yeah. Also, that's the publisher prices for our university and for the for the online pricing. It's about $50 difference.
I have a question that flows from the panel that we had yesterday. It was faculty people that had done the open textbook, and it was actually a sociology professor, so I want to ask you, Dr. Miller. If a faculty member wants to apply for the open textbook grant for an entry-level class, which is what we're encouraging, right? They said to me, but we have a policy that every professor has to use the same textbook. So how can we get around that so that these people that are interested in open access can participate, but not offend that policy?
I don't want to speak out of turn, but I'll speak anyway. The whole single textbook regulation stems from a desire to reduce the cost to the student. And that didn't come from us, that came from the state level. So I don't know if those of you who've been here long enough to remember when this came down was that certain levels courses you had to commit to a book that everyone would use for a period of years. And the idea was that it would reduce this new edition and different people using different books. And basically the motivation was to reduce the cost for students. So my perspective is if, I don't know if it's Dr. James or Kozlowski or whomever it was, but if they wanted to propose to use an open textbook that would in fact be free to students, that's in line with the spirit behind the motivation for that rule in the beginning. So I think we can take that forward as an exception.
And that's exactly what we did in our case, was we simply filed a textbook exception and explained, you know, that the textbook that we wanted to do a trial run, we wanted to do a dry run with this textbook in one section before we adopted it for all the sections.
And in the short end, you know, we do exceptions in our office, but then if it were to be in mass, I think it would end up being a larger conversation at the state level, but again, it's towards the spirit of saving students money, and that's the whole purpose of the rule to begin with.
And I can follow up. I'm on as an ex officio member of the textbook committee, and that came up last year. I remember if it wasn't last year, the year before. And just like Amy said, I mean, it's a matter of getting a textbook exception, which happens for other reasons as well, but for this reason, I don't see there be any resistance to doing it. Sometimes there's resistance from the bookstore or from different faculty, but in this situation, it's clearly, like Amy said, the reasons are different than most other instances.
Thank you.
Tell her she didn't call
Well, we've kind of got a little, one thing I want to kind of come back around to, while we're on the subject of open textbook, because this is something I get asked all the time, but I think it also comes back to something Dr. Cannon mentioned earlier with publishing articles, T&P. So I get asked all the time by faculty members, they're wondering if I'm creating an open textbook, how does that factor into that process? Does that factor into that process? And so I guess the broader question, and then we can kind of drill down to some of those more specific elements, is how are T&P guidelines changing to adapt to some of the new things that are emerging through things like open access? So things like open textbooks or publishing in an open access journal as opposed to sort of the more traditional journal, or are they really adapting to that?
I'll let you take that, Gordon.
I don't know that they are adapting to that. I think there might be some pressure in academic affairs to modernize some of that. But, you know, it's difficult because just like there's lousy open access journals, there's also, and have been forever, lousy subscription journals as well. And usually you leave that to the department and the experts within that field to make a judgment when a tenure and promotion package comes forward as to whether or not it is really a valuable contribution. So, at least in my mind, I've never really understood the difference between someone saying, well, this is open access, so it can't be as good as, because as long as you know who's publishing, it's an expert, you see the material that's publishing, you look and see who the editorial board is, you probably have some idea who some of the peer reviewers are. Sometimes they list a peer review panel. You can make that sort of judgment. Now, again, if you're, like you're saying, if you fall prey to one of these journals that changed the name of a famous journal just by one letter, and it's going off to Uncle Bob and Aunt Mildred to do the reviews, it's really incumbent on the faculty that are part of the tenure and promotion committee to make those decisions. But it is a little bit slow. And, older folks sometimes, like myself, I can say older folks, they'll go, well, I like to see something published in science. I don't know about this online science thing, even though it's exactly the same editors, the same reviewers. So that happens, I think.
And to Dr. Ken's point, on publishing, is the same question, same answer, that it is a departmental level decision around the TMP documents, how they would value something like an open access textbook authorship, and then that would have to be looked at in terms of their guidelines and how they wanted to handle that.
Any other questions from the audience before we move on?
I think it just, I was curious about the Open Textbook Initiative, and is this for support to actually write an open textbook or to engage in some process that would involve adoption of an existing textbook?
Well, there's actually 3 tiers, so you can submit a proposal on one of those 3 levels. So the tier 1 is just the basic adoption of something that's already made.
Okay.
The tier 3 is is to write your own.
Okay.
Yeah, and then tier 2 is kind of in the middle. So yeah, any level along that spectrum, from just grabbing an open textbook that's already done and replacing your existing textbook with that, or building your own from the ground up.
Great, thank you.
And I will give kudos to Josh and to the others in university libraries for the work they've done with helping faculty who are interested in this learn how to navigate the world of open educational resources, how to pull things together, how to adhere to copyright policies, and there's a lot of material out there that people don't realize. And so I think university libraries have done a great job with helping faculty understand that and figure out creative ways to build their classes.
And to piggyback on that, I want to give a word of compliment to our research librarians, because one of the elements of this program is that any faculty member who's accepted as part of the program, you're paired with one of our research librarians who can kind of help you with finding resources and help you along that process. So that's a huge benefit for the faculty to do it. Is you're not in this on your own. You've got somebody that'll help you with it, that knows where to find materials that you can use when you're putting that together. And so that's to me, that's one of the biggest selling points of our program is the work that they do and the support that they provide along the way.
I think another selling point of this whole open access movement, and also the things that you were just talking about that reference librarians are working with faculty on, is just an awareness for faculty to learn about their author rights. Because even in the old traditional system, as an author, you have right, and I mentioned earlier how we just give away our product to the publishers, but that doesn't have to be that way. I mean, as an author, especially as somebody who's accomplished in their field, you have leverage, and you don't have to just give it over. You can give it over with contingents, or with you can reserve some of the rights. You don't have to. If you're willing to walk away and go someplace else, you're willing to. You can negotiate a better deal rather than just giving everything over to the publisher. So I think the open access process, where that is certainly a part of it, negotiating the copyright and doing all that, although it's probably something that some professors would just rather forget about and just go on to their next project, but it is an important part of the process.
But I think you're right, knowing that, I think most people didn't understand that, and you're so excited about getting, you've been back and forth maybe with the editorial board 3 times with corrections and whatnot, and the thing comes back, well, it's accepted as is, and so you're just so excited and get it out of here, and it never dawns on you. Maybe I ought to tell them, because one of the things you've got to sign is giving them the copyrights, to say, maybe I don't want to sign this for it. And the last time that I published a standard paper like it, I just for the hell of it did not sign it. And guess what? They still published it. But I maintained the copyright.
Yeah. Well, you would be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't be surprised, by the number of times that we'll have faculty that will just automatically assume, well, I wrote this, I should be able to do whatever I want to with it. Well, no, actually, when you published it in that journal, you signed the form that says, no, the copyright's theirs now, not yours, so it doesn't matter that you wrote it, you gave all that away. And so now they get to tell you how you can use it or what the guidelines are for that. So, yeah.
And you see those things posted a lot of times in places. People posting their their papers, and it just can't possibly be illegal in some cases. I know there are legal ways to do it, but there's, ResearchGate, for example, I know you can put whatever you want on there.
I'm involved in a journal, the Journal of Latin American Geography, and it's a pretty tight-knit group, and we got on Project Muse, which actually diverts money back to the organization for downloads. And so there was like, don't put it on your resume on your website, put a link to Project Muse,
right,
and then give them, give the organization some money.
Mm.
And that proved actually rather lucrative. Over several years, these nonprofit organizations had to come up with creative ways to deplete their accounts because they were making a lot of money on Project Muse. So.
Did not know that.
Other questions? Okay, one thing that I want to talk a little, or just kind of want to talk a little bit about while we're all here is maybe just some of the different library initiatives that are going on to support some of these things. I mean, we've talked about, obviously, the Open Textbook Initiative. Do you want to say a little bit about some of our plans for support of data management, and also even some of our publishing activities?
Yeah, for data management, Lisa and Tisha have been working. Tisha's been leading the group that we've been moving forward with, looking at how we can serve the campus better in handling data management, starting with data management plans, and also throughout the whole process of handling whether it's just survey results or if it's huge data sets. We're putting together a process or an infrastructure where it'll be one place that will provide assistance for faculty to do it in a best practices sort of way, rather than everybody doing it their own way on their own desktop or with their own hard drives, and storing these things as best they know how. So that, I guess, is moving forward, and we hope to have be ready to support faculty by January 1st. Still on target to hopefully do that. And so I think that'll get us in a good position to have another touch point with faculty and helping them with information needs and with that kind of.
The other thing, again, to give a shameless plug, because it's what I deal with on a daily basis. So I manage Aquila, the University's institutional repository, and so Aquila has capability for publishing journals within it as well. So we actually have a few academic journals that are published through Aquila. And not all open access journals for that matter. I mean, one of the ones we have is sort of a hybrid OA, Gulf and Caribbean Research, which that one's an interesting story, because that was a journal that was published for about 40 years, and then as a print journal, and then at some point along the way their funding dried up, and so the journal ceased. But then we were able to come back to them a few years later and say, we've got this platform available for you if you want to transition to online. That cuts out all of your overhead in terms of having to print, having to mail out issues, and so they were able to sort of rework that and have resurrected that journal as an fully online journal that's published through Aquila. And we have several others that are fully open access as well. So we've got that as a tool that's available to faculty in terms of actually publishing. We've got the capability where if you've kept your rights, going back to that conversation, then you can actually upload your articles that you have the rights to Aquila, and all those are open. So I mean, we see worldwide downloads of all this information. I mean, it's one of the great things I like about Aquila is if you go to the homepage, there's this little map there where you can watch the downloads come in from literally all over the world. We just hit the 1 million mark about a month ago. And so it's really an opportunity where scholarship that's being produced at this university is being set before the entire world. The entire world is benefiting from the work that we're doing here. And if you want to talk about a way to improve the university's international profile, well, that's a way to do it. It's a way where, like I said, scholarship by USM faculty and students is being utilized, being accessed by folks literally worldwide. So again, that was my little shameless plug, since that's my little area in all this. But we've got a about 5 minutes left, so there's time for maybe one more last question. Anybody have anything they want to throw in here while we're... All right, well, I'm going to take that as a note. Anybody, any parting thoughts from anybody on the panel?
Thank you all for your interest, and please spread the word to faculty about the call for participants for the new seminar workshop.
If you have questions
Want to
about
read
that,
physics today, come see me.
well, just to then a couple of housekeeping things just to wrap up. Be sure if you did not get an evaluation, let me know. But if you did, then be sure to fill that eval out and just leave it on the table on your way out. We will be back next week, next Thursday at 2. We'll have our next session in this series, and that session is going to be on why open access matters for graduate students. But one of the components of that session is we're going to talk about some ways that faculty, or some ways that the libraries, for that matter, can support graduate students in navigating this landscape and navigating some of these new models that are out there as they're getting ready to start their careers. And so even though that on some level it's targeted a little more towards students, I would definitely encourage some faculty to come as well, because it may be a good way for you to get a sense of how you can better help your students. But other than that, then let's just please thank our panelists for a really good